And Thrivent's mission is to connect two areas of our lives which sometimes we don't think as being compatible, right? Finances and faith. Yet when you look at the verses that not only Jesus spoke, but are spoken in the Old Testament about money, it is incredible. It's spoken twice as much as prayer. So God entrusts to us, we're stewards of His. So Thrivent is an organization, as you all know, that partners with the Christian community in doing two things. First of all, getting our own finances fit so we can become stewards of what God has given us. So we can ultimately be generous to give as the Holy Spirit instructs us to give. And to whom much is given, much is what? You got it. Required. Some verses say expected. You are exactly correct. So I think you are all up to speed on this, and it's great to see everyone's smiling faces. It's wonderful to be here. So why don't we get into the material at first? And one of the things that I wanted to say is, just looking out in the audience, I think the demographic, meaning from a standpoint of age group, you never want to ask poll people what their ages are, right? But I can see most of us are probably still in the working world, and we're going towards that age of retirement, whatever that age may be, and whatever retirement may look like. But at the end of the day, I'll say this, and I really mean this. When I got into the business 26 years ago, the focus was on accumulation, meaning on how do you save, how do you build that nest egg? And for many of us, if we worked for either a government agency or we were a teacher or a larger corporation, it was kind of done for us, right? It was set aside, a pension, or even a 401k. Where we had, in essence, forced savings, or somebody was putting money aside for us. That built up, it earned interest, we weren't tempted to go in and take it, and at the end of the day, we have this, what one of my colleagues talks about, a bag of money that becomes ours to do with what the Lord grants us, the provisions. And today, things have changed. Pensions have kind of gone away. The magical 401k matching programs, although still there, they've somewhat waned. So the accumulation side has become a little more difficult, but still much easier than the second phase of planning for retirement or becoming financially fit. It's called the distribution phase. And that's what I wanted to speak today. So think of this, accumulation very simply is you and I taking what God's given us, and Thrivent has this 10-10-80 principle, which John has probably spoken about before, right? The first 10 we do what with? We tithe. We give it back to the Lord. It's already His, right? The second 10%, again, these are just general percentages, at least on the back end, we save. And then think about it, and every time I quote this statistic, I've been doing it for years, 80% has been entrusted to us to do with as the Spirit leads us, right? I mean, that's incredible. If you don't think of it that way, it becomes really easy to do what? Kind of spend the 80 first, right? And then whatever's left over, I'll give and save. So the 10-10-80, but what really has become the most difficult aspect for folks, not because of their own undoing, but because of the barriers that are placed in front of us. And I want to talk about how we get through those. So if you would open up your packet, I want to show you this pamphlet. It says, Retiring Wisely. Now, one of the things that I always used to quote, I've been doing public speaking for years, I just love addressing folks in an audience format, is I would always say to folks, do you know that they polled Americans recently, and they asked them what their greatest fear in life was? Dying is number 2. Do you know what number 1 is? Does anyone know what number 1 is? I'm sorry, did you say heights? Oh, heights. Well, that would be mine, but the older I get. Oh, gosh. Well, that's the new, it's public speaking. Yes, it's public. And that was always one, but what you said, man, I'm sorry, I forget your first name there. I'm sorry. Yes, Julie, and then the lady sitting right in front of you. Yeah, Lynn. Yeah, Lynn said it's running out of money. So the polling about 5 years ago was public speaking, which is for a lot of people very fearful. And now it's running out of money. That's replaced it, which is incredible when you think about it. Now, why is it? On the one hand, there's good reasons for it. We're living a lot longer. The technology in healthcare has become phenomenal to keep folks alive. People are staying healthier. or learning things about nutrition, and there's experts that are going to speak to all that, about staying physically fit, right? It's just incredible the longevity that just a generation ago and what that is today. But the issue now is it used to be, and in former generations, the man tended to be the breadwinner, right? And he would work until his last days and pass away and only be retired for a year or two and then pass away. Today, it's 30, 35 years in retirement. So that pool of money, how do you take it? How do you do two things? You do, number one, generate an income that is appropriate to meet your needs. We'll get to what that is. But then also, how do you overcome things like that are out of your hands, such as the erosion of purchasing power? Does anyone know what the word for that is? Inflation, very good. We've all heard the word before. What does it mean, right? Now we talk about deflation. We talk about negative interest rates, right? Crazy stuff out there. How do you take all of that and make sense of it? So if you would, here is the bullet points that we're going to speak to over the next 10 or 15 minutes. And what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is I'd love to open it up for questions. Anybody has anything you want to ask us? My goodness, I know that we hear news blurbs 24/7. I accidentally walked in the third floor here, and I looked to my right, and there was a TV monitor, and the 24 News Hour channel was on, right? And it's just incredible. We have it on our phones. We have it on the internet. So the first thing is outliving your assets. How do you protect against that? There are certainly ways to do so, and we can get into those specifically. Probably it's different for each person on a one-on-one basis, but there are many strategies and techniques to use for that. The next is something we call volatile financial market performance. Has anybody been following the markets lately? Right, it's just, and I will say this too, I've been doing this for 26 years. There's been times when markets have dropped in a greater descent, faster, quicker, deeper, but I've never heard more banter surrounding the whys, and what I'll say is illogical connections between certain assets, certain countries, and certain issues than I have at this point in time. It is really difficult to kind of unravel the onion skin, if you would, to determine why is lower crude oil prices bad for a consumption nation like ours. And we continue to do all the analysis, and again, I'm not going to really get into that at this point in time. But those are the things that many people question. And what happens is that people, when they determine things to be ambiguous or opaque, they basically form this level of personal gridlock, and they tend to do nothing. So the plan gets set aside, and again, that's what we want to partner with folks to begin the process of doing, of thinking things. So again, if certain things are illogical to you when you read the news, don't feel bad about that, because that's something that we view as well. So that's number two. Number three is, and I kind of chuckle when I read this, the negative impact of inflation on purchasing power. Now, you guys have heard the term inflation before, right? Inflation simply means that your currency, a dollar, is worth less over time. It's just the natural occurrence. We've now heard the term deflation, right? And what that basically means is the price of goods and services are dropping. The power of the dollar you have goes further. And we're told that that's worse, right? If you go back to a point in time when that actually happened, was the Great Depression. So we hear all these terms. How do you protect against deflation? And now we have to deal with, has anybody heard the term negative interest rates? Yes. Yeah. Now think about that. Let's say that, and I'll use Amanda for example, as she comes, I go to her and say, you know what, I'm really struggling right now, could I borrow some money from you? And she's generous enough to do so. And then I say to her, you know what, also I'm going to charge you interest for the right to lend me money. Now what do you think her reaction would be? Yeah, exactly, right? Well, that's what's going on. Switzerland, Sweden, Denmark, the Euro area, now Japan have jumped on that bandwagon. If you want to place dollars in their major banks, you certainly can do so, but you pay for the right for them to do that. So how do you overcome that? There are just some crazy things out there, again, which are confusing, and you wonder why they're occurring. But again, that's another one. So how do you get through inflation and deflation? I ask this question, do people think going forward that the tax laws are going to allow at least federal income tax to either be lowered or made higher? Who thinks lower? Goodness, nice, still the pool. How about higher? Yeah, higher, right? So always. So how do you plan for that, right? You have to put a contingency that maybe next year or the following year after that, that every dollar that you actually take from your retirement pool as you're planning for retirement is going to be taxed at a higher rate. Now there's a couple of magical dates, ages. The first one is 59 and a half. Does anyone know what 59 and a half is there for? Yeah, I don't expect everyone to know this, but you got every answer correctly. That's when you are able to take money from a 401k or an IRA exactly without being penalized. So 59 and a half, between 70 and a half, what's the magical thing that happens at 70 and a half? If you've done nothing up until then, go ahead, Lynn. You have to start distribution. It's called RMD, Required Minimum Distribution. So the government, vis-a-vis the IRS, mandates that you begin taking monies from your IRA and your 401k, which built up, tax deferred, right? Now the tax man cometh and you have to, in essence, pay that. So, exactly. So how does one plan for that, right? Do you begin at 59 and a half to start paying your taxes by distributing it, or do you wait until you're 70 and a half? And it's different for each person, right? Depends on the health of that individual, the longevity, what their goals are. Are they in ministry? Do they want to give monies maybe to grandchildren to help them with their education? There's a whole bunch of things that come into that financial plan that, again, because we're living longer and we're much more prosperous than previous generations, that we didn't have to deal with before. So let's go to the second page. We give some answers kind of on the second page. So, and I would say this, if you're in your working years, what you really should be most honed in on is what we call growth. Now, why is that? Many financial experts, and we're of this ilk, that say if you don't need your money for greater than 5 years, if your disposition is so inclined, you should have those assets exposed to those that appreciate over time. Now, what are some assets that appreciate over time versus inflation? Real estate. Real estate obviously is one. Anything that's a tangible asset, right, that you can touch, you can feel, you can smell. It has value, and people as a society have defined and assigned value to it. What? Gold is another thing, absolutely. So precious metals, right? We've assigned value to that. Some of you are missing the big one. When you're an owner in a business that's publicly traded, what is it that you're given? Stocks, right? Now, stocks, I think, unfortunately, have been given a bad rap. A lot of people have heard, when you invest in the stock market, right, you're gambling. And I tell people that's not necessarily true if you're invested for the long term. Do you know that if you invest and you go back over time, you go back to 1870, where the data is very robust, and you look at 10-year periods, there's only 2 periods that you had a negative return after 10 years. So I can't predict the future, but I can tell you that you have a 98% probability of having a positive return after any given 10-year period. Now, when it gets down to 7 years, that number is at 82%. At 5 years, it's still at 78%. So again, when you're meeting with a financial planner and you're determining what asset mix I am to have, we simply look at probabilities and we give an answer. We don't try to forecast necessarily, but we look at the past and we do the analytical work. So this first is what we call bucket, is long-term growth assets. So for those of us that are, again, building a nest egg that someday we plan to generate income from, for whatever reason that may be, to invest in a business, again, to live off for retirement when you're not working, that's the most prudent way to view it. Now, there's 2 other stages that we have there, right? If you look at these 2 check marks, it says guaranteed income assets and near-term or liquid sources. So if you would put to that long-term growth assets greater than 10 years. So that's what the focus is. So what a lot of folks used to do is they used to take, again, this pool of money, and they used to just generate an income from it and hope that it lasts until they pass on. What now people have realized is that they're living much longer. So we slice the time frames into pools of assets that have different components inside of them. So greater than 10 years should have, and you all nailed it, should have real estate, should have stocks, should have precious metals, and a combination of those in a pool of diversified assets. The second group is really from a 3 to 10-year time frame. That's kind of a long time frame, but it's a mixture of what we just said, those assets, at probably about a 50% component. And what do you think the other 50% are? What are some assets that generate income to us that we buy, and as soon as we buy it, a check is kind of sent to us? Pretty close. Insurance maybe could be used one, maybe, and we'll get to that, that's kind of a near term. How about very simply something like a bond, right? When you buy a bond, right, you lend money to a municipality, quite possibly, or a sovereign government, right, or even a company. You buy a bond, say, from General Electric, GE, right? There's a corporation, it's got AAA credit rating, right? You buy it, and you lend them money, and they pay you an interest rate until that bond comes due. So that's a way to generate income that is not as volatile as stocks, real estate, and gold. We all know those move up and down pretty significantly, right? So in that middle bucket where we have that guaranteed income assets, we want to make sure that we are prudent in who we actually give those dollars to, mostly in a lending format, and they give us a rate of interest that's stable. We have that at 50% and then the growth at 50%. How about the next one? What about near-term or liquid sources? Why is that important in retirement? Because what aren't you doing anymore? You're not earning income, Lynn, right? You're not working. The paycheck's not coming in, right? So you have to, in essence, create this operating account. Now, what are some ways to do it? I think somebody had mentioned insurance back. Maybe a different twist would be an annuity. You, in essence, have an annuity that you give to an insurance company or a bank, and they give you a stream of income that comes in on a monthly basis. So for 0 to 3 years, that money has to be or should be very close to being guaranteed, almost like you did when you worked for your employer. The only two things that would have stripped that guarantee, right, would have been if unfortunately you lost your job or the company you worked for went out of business or the business you're running just didn't work appropriately. So it's this bucket strategy in distribution. Again, it's different for all of us, but the way that we lay it out is that first set, think of the operating portfolio. I need to generate income to meet my living needs in the near term. And then that second bucket is both protecting what I own. It's also growing what I own, but about 50-50, because what am I eventually going to do when that first bucket runs dry? What am I going to go to next? The next bucket, right? So I'm going to be receiving income from it, but I still have a growth component that's refilling it. And those longer term assets are doing what? The growth is coming from there and coming back into the middle bucket comes into the front, and that keeps rolling as time goes on. Now I'll say this, we used to live in a world where we could easily do that. Has anybody heard of a CD ladder before? Certificate of deposit. In the olden days, about 10 years ago, you could go to a bank and you could get 5.5% to 6%. Not now. I mean, now is easy street. I'm not saying that facetious. My goodness, that is a great time. If you're retired, say I put my money in the bank and boom, it's guaranteed I get a stream of income of 5 to 6%. Who would take that today? I sure would think all of us would, right? What are CD rates today? Like 0. 0 to 1, exactly. So what used to work doesn't work now. Now that may happen at some point, and if it does, we certainly make adjustments to our plan as we become financially fit. But today, at least for now, that's different. So is everyone following the bucket strategy? Okay, we got a couple more minutes here, and then I'll open up for questions. Is that okay? Okay, very good. So let's take a look at this, putting it all together. So if you look at this certain page here, we've laid out, in essence, kind of in a pyramid format, how folks can take the next step. So what I do have on the right side is, if you would, and I'm going to just ask if anybody is interested, maybe John has asked you to do this in the past, I don't know. Just based on what I talked about, if anything is ever of interest to you, you can certainly just put your name on here and let us know whether any of these topics are of interest to you. And as you know, complementary analysis, John's told you that before too, so I'm going to put that to the side. I want to show you one thing, and we're going to get to Social Security, and then we're going to open it up for questions. I want you to look at this chart, and I don't want to overwhelm people. This is kind of a difficult concept to follow, and really for many of us probably in the room right now, we may not have to deal with this now. We may have a parent who is in this age group, but this is an amazing scenario that happens ever so frequently. So what do we have here? We have, in essence, if you look in the middle of this, we have a couple who are both retired. They're married and they're filing jointly. And as you see, you can run down all the way to the bottom. They draw Social Security, and we have the bottom number is the tax number, the 1,140. Now, how do you get there? There's various ways to get there. They have an income that's coming in maybe from a pension, from a retirement plan, from where both of those worked. They have not begun yet to take their RMD, the required minimum distribution. So what happens to the next set of numbers? All of a sudden, they turn 70 and a half. So as Lynn said, they need to start taking those dollars. Now, many people say, that's nice, I'll take those dollars, but again, who cometh? The tax man, right? So the tax man's coming after, and in essence now their income increases and the 1,140 goes to 4,000. Now you're getting paid from this IRA because you have to distribute the assets, you have to pay tax on, but here's the sad thing, and we'll just use the man in this case. The man passes away the next year. So his Social Security is gone. Hers can step up, but her Social Security is gone, but we still have what left over? We have 2 IRAs and 2 sets of what to pay? Tax, right? Look at the bottom line number. $4,250. She now has to file as a single. So again, why is this important? It's important because these strategies are a must as we go forward, because there are dates many of us are going to hit as we live longer, and maybe to some of us 59 and a half or maybe even 70 and a half sound like a long way away, or some of us are closer to that. But this is incredible. It's amazing, and I'll mention this too, that there are 2 provisions in the Social Security Code which are going to expire. One is in April of this year. Now they allow us to be grandfathered, and what it does is it requires, first of all, one to be married. So if you're a married couple, you used to be able to do a strategy, or at least you can up till April 30, called file and suspend. And very simply what it means is if, let's just say the husband was the bread earner, and the husband is able to file for his Social Security, suspend it immediately until he's 70, where he has to take it, and now the spouse can take half of his. Now the reason that they would do that is because what? Right now they may not need all of his money, right? So he's able to file and suspend, and he builds up these credits, and these credits have to be taken at age 70. That is a tactic that, because men now start living longer, like, wow, I don't need this money right now. I can delay the tax on it. And when I'm 70, I can pull out a lot more money. I may live to be 85 or 90, as many men are doing. So as everyone gets, so the IRS kind of thought, my goodness, we're giving a freebie away, right? There's another one, and that sunsets April of 2016, another one that sunsets not until 2019, and that's called Claim Now, Claim More Later, which kind of sounds like kind of a fancy, dance around, right? But Claim Now, Claim More Later is a similar strategy for married couples where, in essence, they can claim their Social Security, but by using these coordinated benefits, they're able to get more at a later date. Now, interestingly enough, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Boston College, a school on the East Coast. They got some of their PhD students together a year back in the Center for Retirement, and one of their thesis was, in their doctoral program, was to find these loopholes in the Social Security Code legally, and they did, and people began to use these. So I'll wrap it up with this. There are many strategies that are available to you and I that are legal. And I would say this, it becomes an overwhelming thing at some point in time if you're not working with a trusted advisor, again, who has a deep-rooted faith component. We love to talk with anybody at any point in time. So.